Hi. This Kantian footnote comes from Kant's Groundwork for the Metaphysics of Morals from page 22 of this Hackett edition. This is coming from near the beginning of the second section of the Groundwork. The second section is titled Transition from Popular Moral Philosophy to a Metaphysics of Morals. I'll read you the sentence that the footnote occurs in, then the footnote, and then I'll say a bit about what I think it means. Kant writes, "For the pure thought of duty and of the moral law generally, unmixed with any extraneous addition of empirical inducements, has, by the way of reason alone, which first becomes aware hereby that it can of itself be practical, has an influence on the human heart so much more powerful than all other incentives," footnote, "which may be derived from the empirical field, that reason in the consciousness of its dignity despises such incentives and is able gradually to become their master." And here's the footnote to the word incentives. "I have a letter from the late excellent Sulzer, in which he asks me why it is that moral instruction accomplishes so little, even though it contains so much that is convincing to reason. My answer was delayed, so that I might make it complete. But it is just that the teachers themselves have not purified their concepts, since they try to do too well by looking everywhere for motives for being morally good. They spoil the medicine by trying to make it really strong. For the most ordinary observation shows that when a righteous act is represented as being done with a steadfast soul and sundered from all view to any advantage in this or another world, and even under the greatest temptations of need or allurement, it far surpasses and eclipses any similar action that was in the least affected by any extraneous incentive. It elevates the soul and inspires the wish to be able to act in this way. Even moderately young children feel this impression, and duties should never be represented to them in any other way." So that's footnote 2 from page 22 of this copy of the Groundwork for the Metaphysics of Morals. So what does Kant mean here? Kant is talking here about the purity of motive, the motivation for acting morally, and about moral education. So let's take a quick walk through that long sentence and then through the footnote again, trying to shorten it up, tighten it up, and express more clearly Kant's core insight here. Kant writes, "The pure thought of duty and the moral law." Okay, so simply thinking about my duty, what it is, thinking about the moral law in all of its majesty and dignity, unmixed with any empirical inducements, any material or sensual incentive I might have to follow the moral law, any concern for pleasure or reputation or even salvation, even kind of heavenly pleasures that might follow on my doing a good deed. Set that all aside. Don't contaminate the purity of the moral law with that. Just think of the moral law by itself alone. And Kant says here, that pure thought has, by way of reason alone, an influence on the human heart. Okay, we see here a central Kantian idea. The rational idea of duty and of the moral law draws reason towards it. Human reason can appreciate that in a way that has this overwhelming influence on the human heart, which chooses our actions. An influence on the human heart so much more powerful than all other incentives, that's where the footnote is flagged, which may be derived from the empirical field. So what is Kant telling us here? The pure idea of duty and reason has an influence on the human heart much, much more powerful than any sensual or pleasurable or monetary empirical inducement could possibly have. The thought of gain is as nothing for human reason compared to the thought of the moral law and of duty. So much more powerful that reason in the consciousness of its dignity despises such incentives and becomes master over them. And there's a picture, as it were, of Kant's idea of the moral law, that as we proceed toward moral development and moral goodness, we become more and more the rational masters of the empirical incentives that are dangled before our sensual being from time to time. So the footnote, what does Kant tell us here in the footnote? He relates, he had a letter from Johann Sulzer, the late Johann Sulzer, asking, why is moral education so useless? Why is it that we can't seem to actually improve people and children by presenting this moral education? Because there's plenty in it that is rationally compelling, that is convincing to the mind. Why isn't it changing people's behavior to make them better? And Kant's answer is that the teachers are trying to do too much. The teachers are screwing it up by trying to offer as many different possible reasons to be good as they can. So they might say, you should be good because it is your duty, and you should be good because it will gain you a good reputation, and you should be good because it will make you wealthy. And so we have this multiplication of motives for being good, and teachers in providing this are thinking that they're strengthening the students' moral character, when in fact they're doing the opposite, Kant is saying. What they really should do would be to throw out all the empirical incentives to good behavior and focus just on that one pure idea of duty and of the moral law. And so he says they spoil the medicine by trying to make it really strong. Then he says, this is really remarkable. Kant says, the most ordinary observation reveals. It's obvious. In fact, it's blindingly obvious, says Kant, that a righteous act represented as being done by a steadfast and pure soul, without any concern for empirical incentive, in fact, overcoming temptation and contrary empirical incentive, that act is so much superior to any kind of good act which we see as also being self-interested, that there's no comparison between the two. So if you know Kant's ethics, you should recognize this pattern. It's the good that is done for the sake of the good. It is the duty that is done purely for the sake of duty that is truly admirable. Duty that is done for a motive that is mixed, because it's your duty, but also because it's profitable to you financially, that's not as admirable, according to Kant. If we remember Plato's Republic, Book 2, we can compare this to Glaucon's challenge to Socrates to praise justice for itself, independently of its reputation or of any kind of, we might say, empirical inducements that might accompany it. Kant here maybe is doing something remotely similar. So what else? The last thing that Kant says in this passage is that it elevates this idea of pure duty. It elevates the soul, and it inspires in the soul the desire to imitate, to be capable of imitating. So when I see somebody do something heroic, I am inspired and elevated by it. My reason recognizes the purity and the rationality of the action, and I aspire to be like that. I want to be like that. This moves my heart towards trying to be ethical myself. Kant says this is, even children can understand this. In fact, this is the best, in fact, the only way to educate children morally, is by presenting them with examples and stories, story after story, of this pure action for duty against all possible incentives. It seems like some of Kant's claims here might be subject to empirical test. He's making some claims in moral psychology that we might evaluate and accept or reject. In Kant's favor, I could say the structure of many fairy tales and traditional folk tales seems to bear him out on this. What do we see? We see the hero doing the right thing for the sake of doing the right thing. We see the hero presented with opposition which would give him empirical incentives not to do the right thing, but he overcomes it, and we admire him for that. And Kant's suggesting that our admiration is in part a rational admiration, not just a kind of affection or passion that we have. We can even see this maybe in contemporary society, when we hear a story of a young man who comes and helps clean up after riots have struck a store in his neighborhood, not because he expects to gain anything from it, but because it's the right thing to do. we admire him. In fact, we fall over ourselves perhaps to reward him precisely because he didn't expect a reward. So we have GoFundMe campaigns and other ways of trying to funnel reward money to people. Why? Precisely because they acted in such a heroic, disinterested way. We see the purity of their will sort of elevates and inspires our moral character as well. So I hope you've gained a better understanding of Kant's moral philosophy through this quick look at just one sentence and footnote from the Groundwork for the Metaphysics of Morals. Thanks for watching today. Goodbye.